Content warning. The following horror narrative contains fictional depictions of intense psychological themes and disturbing imagery intended for mature audiences. 16 plus. This content is presented as an artistic exploration of fear in storytelling traditions. All characters, events, and scenarios are entirely fictional.
Found document. Journal recovered from abandoned residence at 1437 Willow Street. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, each wooden groan measuring out my descent like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't name. Cold air wrapped around my ankles, a gentle pressure that seemed to whisper, "Turn back." But the power was out, and the breaker box wasn't going to reset itself. I swallowed hard, fighting the familiar tightness in my chest. Since the accident when I was 8, trapped for hours in an abandoned root cellar during a game of hide and seek, confined spaces had been my personal hell. But that's why I bought this house after Emma left, wasn't it? To prove I could face my fears alone. "You always run away," she'd said during our last fight. "Not anymore. Not from anything." "It's just old house sounds," I muttered, fumbling with my phone's flashlight as it cast wild shadows across the unfinished walls. Grandmother's house had the same smell, earth and time and secrets. Maybe that's why it felt strangely familiar when the real estate agent first showed it to me, like coming home to a place I'd never been. The agent had called it a charming fixer-upper with character. She hadn't mentioned the basement, hadn't mentioned that the house stood on what was once burial land for German settlers in the 1700s. I only learned that later from the elderly librarian who gave me a strange look when I mentioned my new address. She hadn't mentioned the local custom of burying personal belongings with the dead to prevent them from walking to retrieve what was theirs. Hadn't mentioned the belief that disturbed graves created restless spirits unable to cross over until they found a replacement. The wooden steps ended abruptly onto bare earth. Not concrete like most basements, just packed dirt that felt oddly warm against the surrounding cold. My beam caught what looked like scratch marks in the soil. Probably raccoons that got trapped down here before I moved in. Or at least that's what I told myself. The space seemed wrong somehow. When I'd inspected the house before buying, the basement had been a simple rectangle, maybe 20 feet by 15. But now the darkness stretched further than my light could penetrate, the walls seeming much farther apart. An optical illusion, surely. Darkness plays tricks. Each step deeper made the air thicker, as though the darkness itself had substance. The silence wrapped around me, no longer merely the absence of sound, but something actively suppressing it, swallowing my footsteps and even the sound of my breathing. The air tasted of mineral and loam, coating my tongue with a film that reminded me of pennies left too long in a pocket. When I reached the breaker box, I noticed something odd. The metal panel was cool to the touch, but the wall around it felt warm, almost feverish. The contrast between temperatures was so stark that my fingertips burned, as though confused by the simultaneous sensations. The wall itself seemed to have a subtle give beneath my palm, like skin over muscle rather than solid stone and mortar. I swung the panel open and found the main breaker flipped. I hesitated before touching it, suddenly aware of how completely alone I was in this house. No neighbors for a quarter mile, no one who would hear if... "Stop it," I scolded myself. It's an old house, not a horror movie. I flipped the breaker with a decisive click. Nothing happened. I tried again, pushing harder this time. The switch moved back and forth without resistance, but the lights remained off. With a sigh, I closed the panel and turned to leave. That's when I noticed the corner my flashlight hadn't reached. A section of earth that looked disturbed, recently turned over. Unlike the packed dirt of the rest of the floor, this patch was loose, roughly rectangular, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. I shouldn't have approached it. Every instinct told me to climb those stairs and call an electrician, maybe even a real estate lawyer. But something pulled me forward, one reluctant step at a time. The same compulsion that made me buy this house, to prove I wasn't still that terrified child, helplessly scratching at a cellar door that wouldn't open. The dirt was different here, darker, moister. My light caught something pale peeking through the soil. I crouched down, heart hammering against my ribs as I brushed away a thin layer of earth with trembling fingers. Fabric. Not simply white cotton as I first thought, but what appeared to be fine linen with faded embroidered symbols along the edge. Concentric circles pierced by arrows. The cloth seemed to pulse slightly, as though breathing beneath my fingers. A scent rose from the disturbed earth, not the expected decay, but something sharper, like copper pennies and crushed herbs. "This isn't happening," I whispered, my voice sounding foreign in the dense silence. As if responding to my words, a soft exhalation seemed to rise from the disturbed earth. Not a sound exactly, more like a subtle shift in air pressure that made my ears pop. With it came a whispered phrase in what sounded like Pennsylvania Dutch, the same dialect my grandmother had sometimes used when she thought I wasn't listening.
"I found you."
I scrambled backwards, nearly dropping my phone. The flashlight beam swung wildly, briefly illuminating the far corner of the basement, which now appeared much further away than it should have been. For just a moment, so brief I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, I saw something standing there. A figure, motionless and patient, its shape somehow wrong, proportions stretched like a shadow at sunset. Then, darkness as my light swung away. When I frantically pointed the beam back to the corner, nothing was there, just the rough stone foundation and bare earth. The stairs seemed miles away now. The basement had expanded impossibly, the dimensions stretching like pulled taffy. I forced myself to turn my back on that disturbed rectangle of soil, on that empty corner, where nothing had stood watching me. Each step toward the stairs felt like wading through syrup, my muscles leaden with the irrational certainty that something was right behind me. Don't run, don't look back, just steady steps toward the rectangle of lesser darkness at the top of the stairs that marked the doorway to the kitchen. I was halfway up the wooden steps when I heard it. A soft, deliberate sound beneath the creaking of the stairs. The whisper of dirt shifting behind me. The sound of something pulling itself free. I broke my rule and ran, taking the remaining stairs 2 at a time, slamming into the kitchen with such force that I nearly fell. I slammed the basement door shut and pressed my back against it, breath coming in ragged gasps. For several minutes, I stood there in the dark kitchen, listening. No, not minutes. The clock on the microwave showed only 20 seconds had passed. though it felt like I'd been standing there for half an hour. I blinked, and suddenly the clock showed 3:17 a.m. That couldn't be right. It had been just after 6 o'clock when the power went out. I checked my phone. 6:43 p.m. The house remained silent. No footsteps climbing the stairs. No scratching at the door. Maybe I'd imagined it all. Stress and darkness playing tricks. I pushed away from the door but felt a strange resistance, as though I was still pressed against it. For a disorienting moment, I seemed to be in two places at once, both standing in the middle of the kitchen and still against the door. Then the lights flickered on, all at once, every bulb in the kitchen blazing to life. Relief washed over me as I laughed at myself. The breaker had worked after all, just with a delay. Old house, old wiring, nothing sinister about that. I pushed away from the door, still shaking but feeling foolish now. What had I been thinking? That I'd found a grave in my basement? That something had been watching me from the shadows? The mind could create such vivid... A soft thud against the basement door stopped my thoughts cold. Then another, not frantic or violent, almost gentle, methodical, like someone, something, patiently testing the barrier between us. The sound had a peculiar quality, not quite flesh against wood, but something denser, more granular, like packed earth, trying to take the shape of a fist. I backed away, unable to tear my eyes from the door, as the gentle thumping continued. 1, 2, 3 seconds of silence. Then another soft impact. Dust from the frame drifted down with each contact. My back hit the kitchen counter. My hand closed around a knife from the drying rack without conscious thought. "This isn't real," I said aloud. But the tremor in my voice betrayed my conviction. The thumping stopped. Long seconds ticked by in silence. I counted my heartbeats. 12, 13, 14, before daring to believe it was over. Then a voice came through the door, so soft I might have missed it if I hadn't been holding my breath.
Let me out.
The voice was dry as autumn leaves, gender and age impossible to determine. It might have been a voice that hadn't been used in a very long time. The consonants scratched like fingernails against the wood. The vowels seemed to seep through the cracks like water. "You're not real," I insisted, gripping the knife tighter. A sound emerged from behind the door that might have been a laugh, if laughter could wither and decay.
I've been down there so long.
The voice whispered, now slightly clearer, slightly stronger.
In the quiet.
Each word separated by a pause, as though remembering how speech worked.
In the dark.
Another pause, shorter this time.
Won't you let me out?
"There's nothing there," I said, trying to convince myself. "You're just in my head."
Am I?
The voice asked, almost gently, the words now flowing together with terrible fluidity.
Check your hands.
I looked down and felt the world tilt sideways. My fingers were caked with dark soil I'd touched when investigating that disturbed rectangle of earth. But now there was something else mixed with the dirt. Long, colorless strands, hair, and beneath the dirt, just visible at the edges of my nails, Something dark seemed to be spreading beneath my skin like ink in water.
You touched me.
The voice said, a terrible warmth creeping into its tone.
That means I can touch you now.
As the word settled into the air, I noticed something worse than the spreading darkness beneath my skin. My right hand had begun to move independently, fingers curled into claws, nails dragging slowly down my left forearm. I tried to stop the movement, but my fingers continued their patient, methodical scratching against my own flesh, leaving behind perfect parallel lines that beaded with blood mixed with something dark and granular. A sudden scratching sound erupted from the door, not the idle scratching of an animal, but the deliberate, methodical sound of fingernails carving into wood. I could see the door shuddering now, thin splinters of wood peeling away from the inside. The scratching matched the rhythm of my own rebellious hand, which continued to claw at my arm. I ran, out the front door, across the porch, down the driveway to my car. The engine roared to life, and I reversed so quickly the tires threw gravel. I didn't look back at the house until I'd reached the main road. All the lights were on now, every window blazing with cold, electric light. Even from this distance, I could see the front door standing open, a stark rectangle of darkness against the illuminated facade. And in that darkness, something standing perfectly still, watching me go. 3 months after I fled the house on Willow Street, I received a courtesy call from the county sheriff's department. The house had been sold again. During renovations, the new owners had discovered something disturbing in the basement. A grave. Excavation revealed the remains of the previous owner, a man who had supposedly moved away 5 years earlier. The coroner estimated he'd been in that earthen grave for at least 4 years. The strange thing, the officer said, is the dirt around the remains was all disturbed, like something had clawed its way out, and the inside of the basement door was all scratched up, like someone had been locked in. I nearly dropped the phone when he added, "We found something else too, a smaller grave, newer, empty, with a wooden marker, had your name on it." I wanted to ask if they'd found anything else, anyone else, but I was afraid of the answer. It's been 6 months now since I abandoned that house. My therapist says I'm making progress, unearthing the trauma, as she puts it. What would she say if I told her the truth? That some things should remain buried, that the boundaries between living and dead, between self and other, between past and present, these aren't academic concepts, but fragile membranes that once ruptured can never be fully restored. The Lenape people who originally inhabited that land had a word for it, a term my realtor conveniently omitted, meaning the thin place, or where the worlds touch. They never built permanent structures there. They understood what we've forgotten, that some earth doesn't want to hold our secrets, that some ground pushes back against what we bury. I wear gloves when I dig in my garden these days. You never know what might be reaching back when you touch the earth. You never know what waits in the quiet beneath. Sometimes, when I wash my hands, I still find traces of soil beneath my nails, no matter how thoroughly I scrub. And occasionally, just occasionally, one of those grains seems to move on its own, burrowing slightly deeper. The specialists say there's nothing there, say it's just tactile hallucination from trauma. They've given me medication for it, but they don't see what happens at night. Don't see how those tiny specks of soil migrate across my skin while I sleep, gradually converging into patterns, into letters, into words, always the same message: I'm still coming. The new owner of the house on Willow Street called me last week, asked if I'd ever noticed anything strange in the basement. I told him no. Told him it was just an old house. Some burdens you don't pass on to others. Some holes can never be filled, and some things once touched never stop touching back. Final page, different handwriting. If you're reading this, you should know you've touched what touched me. That means it can touch you now. Do you feel it yet? That itch beneath your skin?